recording too. And make sure
Man, I can't believe we got 13 people on this. I thought maybe we'd had 3. All right. So what a day. Thanks for turning out.
Hey, Martin. Good to see you again.
Right. Likewise. Thanks for joining. Let me say what we have in mind to do today. Since this question of how can we build a startup community organization that can be financially self-sustaining. This has been a journey that I've been on with my partner Nasser for UVC. We've been on this journey for 11 years now. And I have to begin by saying that we don't have it figured out yet, but we have made a lot of progress. And I got a lot of arrows in my back. I could tell you about a lot of things that didn't work. I mean, more than we have time for today, but I will touch on some of those highlights. And before we get into some of what we've learned on this journey, I'd like to see if we might be able to do some quick intros about who's here, so that you have a chance to say what startup community you're interested in helping, and whether or not it is aspirational or you are already into it. Those are the things that I'm interested in knowing. And we'll try to keep this brief, because my plan is, if we can get through the introduction phase, I'll go into sharing a little bit more about kind of what we've learned on some of those important points. We'll talk about revenue models, sources of funding, that it's not necessarily grants, but program revenue and corporate sponsorships. And we'll precede that with some discussion around how do we build a network with enough supporters that we have something to go to corporate sponsors and others to say, look at what we got. This is why you want to be involved with us. So let's do a quick roundtable here with self-introduction of your startup community, and are you aspirational or are you in launch mode?
Joe, why don't you take it away? You're first on my screen anyway.
Joe Marushak. I'm from Eugene, Oregon. Been doing startup community building in my community for about 9 years now. This is after doing 2 startups that both exited here in Eugene, Oregon. Ran an accelerator, started a small seed fund. Been in it for a long time, and also many arrows in the back stories to tell. So,
All right.
Thanks.
Sir.
Siva.
Yeah, Siva Kakaturi from New Hartford, outside of Utica. I work with Martin on Innovation Collective and other things, and trying to see if we can do more. That's just aspirational, and see what we can do to help the community.
Okay.
Thanks, Siva. Kevin.
Hey everyone, Kevin Rowe. I'm a 7-time entrepreneur, successful twice. Right now I'm in Utica, New York. I'm actually in the process of moving to West Palm Beach, Florida. One of the things I'm going to be working on is the building community in Miami, the growing community in Miami, and also kind of keeping connections right here. So I'm still in Utica right now. So I still have a rapid growing business, but I'm more interested, more passionate about AI and ML and the applications in healthcare, and seeing communities grow around that topic.
Thanks, Kevin. Zach.
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm in Rochester, New York. Just got here about 8 months ago from San Francisco. Fell in love with the startup community there and hoping to help grow it here. I'm only as involved as somebody who's been here for 8 months, but I definitely dove right in, tried to meet everybody, still meeting everybody. Already stepped on some toes and learned some mistakes there.
Thanks,
Also
Zach.
launching a company on June 1st, so excited about that as well.
Zach is a fun story. I'm excited for you to share it sometime. Sam.
Hi everyone, from Leicester, UK. There's 2 of my colleagues on the call as well. We are part of Leicester Startup, so we are focusing on high growth scalable in our Leicestershire area, and our community's been around thanks to Ben, who started it 8 or so years ago. So we're definitely in accelerating mode, and very grateful that Martin joined us a few months ago for one of our events.
Thanks, Sam. Peggy. I believe you're on mute, Peggy. Try that.
Hi, I'm involved with Innovation Collective Utica. I've been working with Martin and with a team on that for a while, and I would say we're making progress. I'm totally new to this world, and I'm on the, as I said, the steering committee. We are looking for individuals interested in understanding what an innovation collective can do in a community and interested in able to invest in the project. So we've actually made some pretty darn good progress, I would say. Thank you.
Thank you. Ben.
Hi, everybody. So I work with Sam and Pete, as Sam said earlier, here in Leicester, England. And this timing of this could not be any better. It's almost as if somebody whispered something in somebody's ear. But we are currently working out how we transition from being publicly funded local enterprise partnership city councils to doing something that's a little bit more kind of washing its own face financially. So how can we keep people employed and keep doing the activities without having to chase complicated, messy funding things?
Thanks, Ben. Pete.
Hi, I'll just introduce on the back of Sam and Ben. So I work with those guys. I'm just down the road. So Leicester is right next to a place called Loughborough. And we have about sort of 650,000 in the city of Leicester. I think it's probably worth saying that Leicester's like right in the middle of England. So if you picked up a map and you pointed your finger in the middle, that's where we'd be. And I guess, you know, Ben, Sam and I have just been in it for the long haul. You know, a lot of people that we work with perhaps think over 3 to 5 year timescales. We think of kind of 10 to 20, I think. Yeah, so hello and thanks very much. I may have to go a little bit early because I've got a few little ones to look after as well. So
Awesome. Well, thanks for being here, Pete. Kelly, good to see you, by the way.
Good morning, James. Hi, everyone. Kelly Reardon here from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in upstate New York. I'm representing Startup Tech Valley, which is a startup community that was born about 7 years ago. We've put about 200 companies on stage, startups, looking to keep them in the Tech Valley area of Eastern New York and help them grow and find more people to be involved.
Thanks, Kelly. David.
Hi, I'm David Beseth. I'm working with James and Martin on the Mortgage Jobs community. And I'm also a student myself right now. I'm in college, so I'm a student entrepreneur. And I work with some other student entrepreneurs. And so I guess that is my community that I am most involved in right now.
Awesome. And Colette.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Colette Powers. I have a wealth management practice on the UBS platform, and I work with a lot of business owners and very active in the business community here. And so I'm very curious about what more good jobs are. A lot of people call me a connector. So I like to keep a pulse on what's going on. And I also have a personal interest and endeavor. My middle son has Down syndrome, just graduated from Inclusive U at Syracuse University, which is a major, wonderful program, but the next step is the big issue. So in the process of starting to try to create something there. And I like to connect the business world with this amazing population of employees. Not sure it's a fit here, but I'm always looking. So there's usually synergy.
So I'm James Shomar. I'm here in Syracuse, New York. been involved in helping build startup community across upstate for a while, especially the past few years with Martin, who's been a good friend. And, one of the things I meant to say this earlier, if you were on the call earlier this week, Martin's obviously got a pretty incredible background through building TriNet, and here specifically we'll talk about Upstate Venture Connect. But one of the things I've been excited about working with him on is just that his heart is truly in this. And, I really appreciate how much space he has made and how much he's really invested himself in helping entrepreneurs and building entrepreneurial community. So I'm excited to introduce him and talk about some of the stuff that he's been able to do over the past, I can't believe it's been 10 years now, and what they built, because it's really awesome. And I hope you all can draw some inspiration from it. So Martin, I'll hand it off to you.
All right. Thanks so much, James. And it's a lot of fun for me, I got to tell you. Yeah, there is a lot happening, and UVC and what we're doing with More Good Jobs are important things for me, but they're not the only things that I'm involved with. And so there is that constant challenge of trying to be productive across the different initiatives that I've taken on. But what I will say that has made this journey fun is that when I go out and work hard and find people that have similar goals, then many of the initiatives that I have overlap with relationships. And if you visit my blog at babinec.com, I actually have a little bit on that story in the about section, because I'm a believer that when you run across people that have similar values and are interested in doing things that are doing stuff that you're doing, then, and if you've got more than one thing going on, as I do, then I might meet somebody in the Upstate Venture Connect side of things. And lo and behold, that person is helpful and to me in another way for maybe Up Ventures Capital, where I do some startup investing. Or maybe it's something appropriate for More Good Jobs, or maybe my foundation, or there's different ways that a person I meet in one of my channels is very useful in one or more of the other channels. And the common base for me becomes finding those people that have not only the professional interest, but also the alignment of values, something that I'll talk about today. And that's what makes it fun. So this is a great opportunity to take that one step further. I'm going to try to keep my prepared remarks fairly short, maybe because this is something I could talk about for a long time, but I'll try to keep it to about 25 minutes so that we have time to get into some interactions. While I'm speaking, as you have questions, put them in the chat. Some of those I may see right while I'm speaking, and it will cause me to address it later on. James will keep an eye open for what's in the chat. And so when I finish speaking, James will help select some additional questions out of the chat and either call upon you or bring the question out himself. So with that said, let me share some of the backstory on our journey for Upstate Venture Connect. And I'll be, of course, drawing on the whole topic of More Good Jobs. So as you think about, even though you're on the More Good Jobs community site, so you know about the book, the question is whether or not you've had a chance to read it. So, we'll be speaking both about Upstate Venture Connect as the basis for this story. But if you've not yet had the chance to actually read More Good Jobs, you'll hear me make several references to the things that I'm talking about here. And almost everything that I've said, there are mentions in a little bit more detail in the book itself. So with that bit of shameless promotion now behind me, let me get back to shut off the screen share and say, in the beginning, when we got together, Nasser and I, to launch More Good Jobs or Upstate Venture Connect, the idea was we were not going to be pursuing public money to build this network across a broad geography that has as its goal connecting startup entrepreneurs to the resources they need to be successful. And Nasser and I, when we first met, we were of a similar mind in terms of that philosophy of organizations don't have relationships, people do, okay? And so can we connect, what can we do to reduce the friction involved for the entrepreneur to meet the right people who can help them? That was our founding philosophy. And with that concept in mind, we now have 11 years of experiments behind us. Some have worked, some have not. And I'll be trying to share some of those highlights with that thrust of, in order to get revenue, you have to have a network, you have to have a base. And yet, when you begin with a concept, you don't have that base. So first we have to talk about how do we build up a base of supporters in terms of just people in the network. And then as you have a bit of a base, then how do you leverage the base for revenue opportunities? That's the sequence here. So what helped when we began is that I did have some capital that I plowed into. So our initial funding, with Nasser being a full-time person on the scene, and for probably the first couple of years, it was just him, me, and my assistant, Mary Lou, as we started to do these experiments. But having his full-time focus on it, and I was largely full-time. It was probably north of 80% of my time, 2 full-time people kind of working on it. We went about first gathering input from those that were already active in various parts of the geographies that we targeted. Since Nasser, his prior role before joining me in UVC, was heading up the Syracuse Tech Garden, which he constructed, and with support from the Chamber of Commerce, he was responsible for creating what was upstate New York's most successful incubator, and had met a lot of startup community people from all over upstate, since that served as a resource center for various programs that were publicly funded, or largely publicly funded, some private sector support. And so he had a lot of relationships. So he went out and started bringing some of those people in. And at that stage, I was very early in my developing relationships in upstate New York, because the prior 10 years, if you read Mortgage Jobs, I was commuting between upstate New York and Silicon Valley. So we began this process with people who were already active in trying to grow startup community in other parts of upstate. And we called them in, and we started doing essentially focus group meetings with people that were doers, meaning we worried less about who the organization was, as long as these people were actually leading something. And then we tried to pick their brains on where could we find points of collaboration. That's where things started to get interesting, because the people we were speaking with as leaders, they had roles, and in most cases they were operating some kind of what today we call in upstate venture development organizations. People like Marnie Levine, who runs Launch New York in Buffalo. People like Zach Schulman, who is active as a venture partner with Cayuga Ventures, and he runs the Cornell University entrepreneurship program now, still very active. People like Jim Sinal, who then was running High Tech Rochester and now is known as Nexus. And others that were already getting a paycheck, even running their organization in their particular community, but nobody was really talking with people in other communities. And as we were having that discussion with these people, we also began to see competition would flare up, all right? And not in a bad way, but there was always concern, since these organizations were out going for grants. There was a certain zero-sum game mentality, which I described, I think it's in chapter 9 or 10 in the book, the one that is about nonprofits. All right, when I describe what's the issues where these nonprofits get worried that, hey, if I go out and collaborate, maybe someone else is going to get a grant that I was going to get. And so from the very beginning, that's what we really fought hard to kind of address the concerns head on and help get across the idea that through collaboration with these networks that were not yet built across the geographic lines, there would be benefit to all if we could collaborate. So the challenge was, how can we find points of collaboration? Because if we could get people to open up some visibility to their networks, that becomes a strategy for building a broader network that through UVC could eventually lead to sustainability. All right. And by the way, one of the reasons that we didn't want to go after public funding ourselves is that we saw the time it takes to get public funding to be long and drawn out. And too many times, the public money comes with strings attached that don't make sense, that get in the way of doing what we felt was what we wanted to do. And just too many encumbrances. And so we believed if we could keep it private sector funded, that we would have more latitude to construct the program that goes to the heart of our mission of connecting entrepreneurs to the resources and specifically the people that those entrepreneurs need to get connected to. And the hardest part is to figure out how to do that at scale. Because if your connection ability is only limited, in our case in the early days, to just me and Nasser being the only ones doing the connecting, that's not scalable. That's where you begin. But like everything else, part of my philosophy is it's all about how can I work myself out of a job? That's my mission in life across all the things that I create. How can I work myself out of a job and be irrelevant and have the organization or company run without me? I've been able to do that with TriNet, even though I'm still on the board and I have a tiny hand in it. That company is not going to miss a beat, even when I step off the board, okay? But I've got a lot of other entities that I can't say are yet at the stage that I need them to be at. So that philosophy, I have a post on my blog, Work Yourself Out of a Job, if you want some more background on that philosophy. So what we did in looking at these partnership opportunities beyond the initial startup community builders that Nasser was able to identify through his organization and get the discussion flowing with them.
For the facility use.
Mm-hmm.
We're good now. Sorry. Everybody should be muted, so.
Okay, is mine off? Am I?
No, you're on.
Okay, good. Thanks.
No problem.
What we did, even in that initial group of our focus group, and many of those people that we had in our focus groups are still connected with us today. Marty Levine, Zach Schulman are on our board of directors for UVC, and we still share in a meaningful way. And we have ongoing ties with Jim Sanal and many others that were part of that initial focus group. We really went out of our way to identify the profile of the people that are important for us to bring into the network. And as you've read Mortgage Jobs, you know that profile very much is about people that give first without an expectation of return. Because one of the things we know and we've seen in other organizations, other social settings that we might walk into, you walk into a group, and if you're being sold to because someone's economic interest in trying to promote what they're doing is overpowering whatever the reason was for having that group come together, those are not the kind of settings you want to be in. So we went out of our way working with leaders, and where would we spend time cultivating our opportunities? It would be with people who are ready to give first without an expectation of return. And when we saw people have their economic agenda advanced to the forefront in conflict with that goal of give first, we basically sidelined them, and they didn't get the kind of help from us that we were giving those that were giving first. All right. Obviously, we can't exclude people from events, but when your resources, which in our case for Nasser and I, we both have an extensive reach. We have a lot of relations, a lot of help that we can give. And we only have so many hours in a day. We have to make conscious decisions about who are we going to spend that time and our relationship capital with. We're selective, and we sideline people, or at least we did not give them the support when they were in conflict with our goal of getting give first people into the network. So the next phase that we went through was starting to build the communications phase of developing some content that would go out through our newsletters and our social. And the challenge is to have the right content sent out in the right cadence, and it has to be professional in its appearance, and it has to have content that is meaningful to the target that we're trying to reach. And in our case, that target is entrepreneurs, investors, and resources that entrepreneurs need. So this is an ongoing effort. We added eventually a marketing person in Kate Cartini, and her presence on the team was super helpful in getting us to a stage where we brought professionalism to our communications, initially on a part-time and then eventually a full-time role. And she helped professionalize our content and build our platforms and mechanisms to get that out. And that proceeded over the next few years of our building up that network. And as part of our network building approach to build volume, it was not only the right content and the right approach in terms of getting that out through social and our newsletters and driving traffic to our website and being able to see where was it coming from, what content was being clicked on, where did we get the click-through rates, learning from our own analytics to keep tuning our message. But we also did things like, as described in More Good Jobs, we created the events calendar. So if you think about the message of what we're trying to do is inform the people and the entrepreneurs, where are there events going on that could be of interest to entrepreneurs? And what we did in creating the events calendar was make it possible for an individual venture development organization and these, startup groups and investors, we made it possible for them to embed that events calendar on their website at no charge as another avenue to spread the word of events and getting people into the right room that needed to get together. Because now somebody who's in Rochester who is very interested in video gaming, for which Rochester has a growing cluster, they would suddenly discover that there's an event in Albany, which is 2.5, 3 hours away, and they would go just because now they saw this is the right event, the right people are going to be there. It's worth a 3-hour drive to get there. And we had people do that. And of course, obviously, with a much shorter drive, Rochester to Buffalo, easy. All right. So the events page on uvc.org is, in fact, our largest trafficked page on the whole site. So this became a community building exercise that helped us build volume, because now we got a reason that people are coming to the site, registering on it on UVC, keeping an eye on the events, helping fulfill that part of our mission, and at the same time helping us build a credible network. We were then inspired to, we tried looking around at charitable donations from individuals, and we still do that. And I'll be frank in saying getting charitable donations from individuals in this space is really hard. We continue to put a little bit of effort on that, but it has not been successful. We do like the idea of even small donations, since it does build engagement. And yes, you'll see a donate button, and we do what we can here and there, especially at the end of the year, to give that some visibility. Has not been a major revenue source, right? So content, promoting events, helping to get our partners get visibility to their events, and looking around for partners that align with us, and helping to tell their story. Our giving visibility to successes of our partner organizations that are in turn spreading information about UVC to their channels. We give them visibility, they come back and reciprocate and help give us visibility. So that's a philosophy that we've taken on. And just like I said earlier, where we put aside those that don't align with us and concentrate on our energies that are showing by their actions that they have the right philosophy and our interests are aligned. Another thing that I'll mention early on is that we worried less about trying to partner with organizations in terms of our search strategy for who to partner with, and instead really concentrated on partnering with doers. It's another thing I mention in More Good Jobs a lot. You hear me use the term doers, people that are in the trenches and showing up. If they're showing up in meetings that are aligned with our direction, and you see them on a regular basis and they're actually doing something, particularly if they're leading something, it's their profile as a doer and a leader in something that's very aligned, that would be individuals Nasser and I would pursue and cultivate so that we find the right way to collaborate. And you might say, when I do get involved with UVC, especially now, it's always in a cultivation mode. All right, so that's the biggest slice of my time for UVC, is taking someone who doesn't know much about UVC and cultivating them so that they know more, and trying to find that right fit for what can UVC do to help you is kind of my approach. Let me understand what you're trying to accomplish. I'm not going to give you all the complete description about UVC. I need to understand what you're doing first. And then the answers that I provide about UVC are really based on my knowing what that particular individual and organization's interests are that might provide a path for UVC to help. All right, now let's get to revenue. Events are one revenue path that we have done some experimenting with, and we don't want to be an events organization. And I say that because events organizations are, to have all your focus on events is time consuming. All right, to do a lot of events requires a lot of labor, and we're a small guerrilla team, even today. All right, so we shifted. We instead of being an events organization, we promote other organizations' events. And then we developed a philosophy of just doing one conference a year, one annual conference a year, which we did not launch until we had enough of a base to have that conference be a couple hundred people, because it's hard to make money as a revenue generator unless you have enough people to turn out. Now, there's a variation on that later on that I'll get to, but that was our first and still significant source of revenue, to do a larger annual conference, which today, COVID being an exception, we in our last two conferences pre-COVID, we had between 350 and 450 people attending, both the last 2 years, 2018 and 2019. And with that kind of volume, that's enough to make some money on as a revenue. But we used the awards theme to start attracting that crowd. So we give out awards, as I describe in the book, awards that also helped us attract people who were nominees, and then we would announce at the conference who the selectee was. So the nominees were bringing their friends. We started with that. We of course also try to select a keynote that would be a draw, which is a bit of a hard work, but in More Good Jobs I talk about what is the process to attract a very in-demand keynote speaker, as we did with Mark Randolph from Netflix, founder of Netflix. And we experiment with different interaction models for the conference to be successful. And over the years, that has proven to work. But to get the right people in the room requires outreach on the part of people with credibility. And so beyond me and Nasser, our next area that we expanded into was the creation of the UNY 50 network. And the UNY 50 network is an interesting one that was inspired by this group called the C100. Because when it comes to the notion of ideas, if I see a good idea someplace, many of you heard me say that I'm a believer in the case philosophy. When it comes to ideas, copy and steal everything, all right? And so I came across this thing called the C100, which is a group of people that are in Silicon Valley that have Canadian origins. And they decided to create an outpost for other people who had this interest or this affinity for having the creation of this community in Silicon Valley that want to support Canadian companies. And there's a really interesting model. So we started picking it apart. And, you know, from that, and if you're interested, I'll put it in the chat, C100 this is what inspired me. We then went ahead and built what is today the UNY 50 network. And the UNY 50 network, remember, is described in Mortgage Jobs. We have just about 50 people that are involved in a curated network, just like we found with C100, and had the opportunity for that curated network to refer entrepreneurs to resources that they need to be successful. And very importantly, we help connect those UNY 50 people with each other. We bring them together in social interactions. We have a UNY 50 newsletter. We do various things to get that group to interact because they have affinity. It's a curated group. And as I describe in the book, that UNY 50, we have an entry standard. And so by making the entry bar very high, then with UNY 50, people, they want to be part of that club. By the way, they pay $1,000 a year as a charitable contribution for the privilege of being in that UNY 50 network. And I'll put that in the chat as well. I'm sure you have looked at this page before, but if not, it's a reminder, and James can circulate it as notes to the chat when we finish. Now, the last area I'll touch on will be the corporate sponsors. In order to get corporate money in with both the event sponsorship and to leverage this network, the very key to make that work is all about how do we understand the target corporate sponsors' parameters of what they're looking for. So in our case here, if we have this network of entrepreneurs, investors, and startup community builders, then you started with the question of, well, what corporate sponsors would be interested in wanting to plug into that network? And we knocked on their door and talked about what's their profile for their target customer. And the more we understood about their target profile, and we could see that map between UVC's target profile and the corporate sponsor's target profile, then we explored how can we get the information we need from our, by the time we started on this path, that we probably had 5,000 or 6,000 people in the network. Today we got 16,000, and we started collecting enough information that would help us tune our inside database so that we would have a better opportunity to refer to the corporate sponsor exactly the right prospective customer that was in their sweet spot. And that's what corporate sponsors will pay for. So we didn't put the corporate sponsorship in front of them until we first sent them a referral or two that was in their sweet spot. That's how you build confidence before you ask them to sign up for the sponsorship. So we send them a referral or two and say, we got more. But if you want to take advantage of it, let's explore how we can get a sponsorship to work for you. And there's different levels of sponsorship, different ways to approach it. But the important lesson learned is you have to have, number one, the knowledge of what that specific sponsor needs, and then the data from the network side to be able to make that match. All right. And that in turn, for that to happen, it means you have to track every interaction. So if you make a referral, what happened to that referral? And those of you that participated in the call that we just did the other day on referrals know what I'm talking about. You got to have a database. You got to track it. You got to know your interactions and get intelligence on what's happening with that referral side. So if I think of the next frontier in closing, the next frontier observations, we continue to refine our backend database. I'm really excited. We're shifting to a new platform called Wild Apricot. And if you're not familiar with Wild Apricot, you find wildapricot.com. If you're thinking about growing an organization to build a startup community, I'm going to highly recommend it. I really like what I see. We're already using it in one of my other networks, one of my other nonprofits called Entrepreneurs Across Borders, which is eaborders.org. And we are now putting it in place in UVC. And part of the beauty of Wild Apricot is it's designed for a member-based organization. It's designed for a nonprofit member-based organization. So it's a CRM, and it has its own presentation layer. So you can create the entire website in Wild Apricot. In fact, I'll put in the eaborders.org in the chat here. So you can look at that. This website that you're looking at, and EA Borders, is actually in Wild Apricot. It was, the whole website was constructed in less than 2 hours. All right. And because we had the content already and we're just able to import it. And that's tied to everything in our CRM. So we have the ability, based on stuff that's flowing through that website, to see the interactions that are happening, and we can do registrations. We have all this capability that you'll find on wildapricot.com. All right. So highly recommend it as another way to move that forward. So that's one thing on the next frontier. The second is we're experimenting with smaller events. We're a selected sponsor where we think we got enough people to bring in, let's say, a dozen entrepreneurs that all fit the sponsor's target. Then we'll do a dinner event or something really special for that sponsor. Because if you can put 10 or 12 people together that are right in the sponsor sweet spot, that's worth a lot of money to a sponsor. That's the next frontier for us. Along with the third frontier, and first frontier was better CRM, Wild Apricot. Second frontier, smaller events with a selected sponsor. Third frontier, connecting talent to opportunity. If you think once we get out of the COVID situation, the demand for talent is going to be so intense. We think there are revenue opportunities. We're starting to experiment. We just finished a virtual career fair that we were able to put together. We learned a whole bunch of lessons on that. We have some other things that we're working on along these lines. We think connecting talent for opportunity is another path for revenue generation. All right. So, James, I will ask you to introduce the questions and select people.
We got some great questions. I'm actually really excited. High level questions. So Zach Marshall says you mentioned resource entrepreneurs throughout your book, and as one of the target markets you send content to. He has sort of a three-part question. What are the different types of resources you are thinking of? How would you prioritize them according to importance? And which ones are easy, neutral, and hard here in upstate New York?
Well, when you think of resources, you almost have to look at it at a persona level, because entrepreneurs represent one persona, investors represent another persona, community builders represent a third persona. And then when you're an organization like UVC, who addresses all three of those personas, then you have to be able to have a little bit of a mix, or you have to siphon off this particular communication goes specifically to this persona. The principal persona that we put most of our emphasis on would be entrepreneurs, and specifically those that are, call it up to Series A level entrepreneurs. And then a sub persona of entrepreneurs would those that would be Series B and beyond, because the experience. So really, entrepreneurs are two. There are the early stage entrepreneurs and experienced entrepreneurs. All right, two different personas. And so our principal audience are the early stage entrepreneurs, and our second most important audience are the experienced entrepreneurs. Because if we can get the attention of both, then we have the opportunity to connect one to the other. So what are the resources? What do early stage entrepreneurs want? They're always interested in path to capital. All right. How can I connect with a channel that will help me grow my revenue? Where can I find the right talent that I need to grow my company? Where can I find mentors? Those are the things that early stage entrepreneurs are typically hungry for. All right. And to a lesser extent, they don't put it as a high priority to find value-added service providers. But part of our communications are to tune what we send out so that it reminds them that there is a lot of value if you have the right partner as a service provider. Experienced entrepreneurs are looking to give back. What are the right messages to have them give back? The reminders of our philosophy of give first. How does it help in a later stage entrepreneur? Why would they want to be involved in mentoring? And so we'd send some of that content out with stuff that we would generate on our own. We would sometimes repurpose content that we would find already out there, whether it's videos or articles that we think were worth transmitting. And I think if you dive into the UNY Pulse, which you can find some archives on the UVC site, you'll get examples of those communications, and dig through our social.
Can you hear me? Okay, sorry, I thought I cut out there. So our friend Ben from the UK asks, what sort of annual turnover have you achieved with UVC, and what does the pie chart of sources look like?
When you say turnover, then I would say, I presume you're talking, in the UK, they call turnover revenue. So for the rest of us, turnover is revenue, okay? So where's the money coming in from? I would say our annual budget is around $250,000, all right? And out of that, probably 1/3 would be program revenue, and probably a little more than 40% are sponsorships. Between program revenue, which are fees that are being charged for events, and sometimes we would do engagements. That's another revenue stream. We would do an engagement to help on a consulting basis if we could find a network effect that would be beneficial for UVC. So as an example, we would do potentially a consulting engagement, as we've done several with NYSERDA, which NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research Development Authority, has built a really good entrepreneur network, and we find a lot of value in partnering with them. So we would do some engagements that would bring our two networks together and get paid for it. So that's program revenue. So we'd have program revenue opportunities like that, 40% or so in corporate sponsorships, and the balance contributions would be the split. Contributions as in charitable contributions, pardon me. And by the way, another thing that's hard that the UK people won't appreciate, but I should mention, is that for UVC, which is under US tax code provision 501c3, public charity, in order to be a public charity, allowing companies or individuals to get a tax deduction, there is a 5-year clock that ticks as soon as you become a 501c3, in which you must be able to get to a path of having a significant level of public support from smaller donations. So even if I were willing to write a check to fund UVC's requirements and fill the whole budget myself, that would not be permitted for us to be a 501c3 public charity. Just wouldn't be permitted. after 5 years. We would get reclassified as a public charity. And then that takes away the tax deduction for many entities, and also will impede your ability to do partnerships. UVC is able to do partnerships with economic development organizations, with colleges and others who are nonprofit, only because we are a 501c3 public benefit corporation.
That's a great distinction, Martin. Good point. Kevin is asking, is the tracking and analytics push, I think that's regarding wild apricot, causing any issues with the referrals feeling organic? If so, what issues does that create?
Has not been an issue. So, you know, and what I will say is the challenge is getting visibility to referrals being made, besides those of us that are on the inside and inserting the data into wild apricot. So what we continue to experiment with are finding the right ways for interactions to get recorded in the system by participating. We're early in the UVC use of wild apricot, and we're still early in EAB, but I can tell you from the journey that I've been on and trying to find the right way to capture referral information without me putting the data in, that's a mission I've been on for 10 years, okay? And I still haven't cracked the code on it. And I, you know, those of you familiar with internet know that's one of my arrows in my back, is that I helped start a company that had that as its goal. And what we went on, even after putting a lot of money in it, we couldn't crack that code. And we continue to be looking for the right way to build that referral tracking capability by our having the right paths for people to interact on the platform and allow us to get that referral connection made without our involvement. So stay tuned, because we have some interesting things we're working on.
Since I'm not seeing, oh, here we go. Ben follow-up says, our desired annual income to keep the lights on is comparatively small, 30 to 60,000 pounds. And we're considering crowdfunding as a route. Any experience with this? Maybe even general thoughts.
We've not had good success in people not wanting to look at what we do in a charitable contribution side. So if you do crowdfunding, are you doing it as a charitable effort, or as, you know, I'd say try it as an experiment. I wouldn't discourage an effort, but I wouldn't want to bank on crowdfunding as being the only way to get to your goal. I think it's hard. And the reason I say that in the US on the charitable side, people look at charitable contributions more through the lens of where they see either a humanitarian need or an educational need, or there are traditional buckets that people look at charitable contributions. And building a startup community doesn't fall into one of those traditional buckets. So that's why it's hard, not impossible. We get a little bit, but it's hard to get people to look at it in a charitable way. And if they're investing in it on a crowdfunding basis, then it's appealing to their interest in supporting that startup community. And your best success is going to come from people that are already engaged in some facet of that startup community. If you, as a result of what Leicester Startups has already done, have brought value to them, then that represents an audience that could be receptive to crowdfunding. So hard to get new people engaged would be my observation.
Zach has a specific UVC level question comment. He said visibility seems like a big challenge. I would 100% agree with that. In Rochester, we have a weekly coffee club to pitch startup ideas and build community, and a startup community book club. I think that's a Richard Glazer thing. And I feel like I've never heard of UVC. How can communities help to get the word out? Maybe location-based ambassadors, chapters, etc.
Yeah, we continue to chip away at that. I mean, Richard Glazer, who was, as you know, in Rochester, carries a lot of hats in getting different things in the startup world together, is without a doubt an advocate, and also on our board at UVC, and helps get the word out. When the Open Coffee House started, there was mention of UVC on many of those open coffee houses when it first began, but it's all about having more people spread the word. So I hope the next time you go, Zach, to the Open Coffee House, that you point it out. If this session has been of value for you, I hope that you would point others in Open Coffee House to both UVC and the More Good Jobs community.
I'll add just peripherally from my experience in UVC, one of the things that's been of value to people in the startup world is it's really been the only source for true media around the startup communities. I mean, like, you know, when ACV Auctions had a $4 billion IPO just down the road in Buffalo, our local business journal didn't even cover it. And so it's really hard through traditional media to get that out there. So I've found that people definitely appreciate that common source of events and media as a centering piece, even if that takes time. Much credit to you.
I see Kevin Rowe put in the question, how much would you recommend to invest from personal finances to launch a rapid growth startup community like UVC? That depends, all right? The variables from my mind would include, how much time are you ready to commit? Because if you're only going to write a check, probably not a good idea. So it begins with, what's your time commitment going to be? And the greater your time commitment will be, the bigger the check can be. All right. Otherwise, the challenge is to make a startup community work, it's all about finding the leadership. If I had not been able to partner with Nasser, UVC would not exist. It's just that simple. We launched UVC because he and I together passionately believed in what we were going to do, how we were going to do it, and we both were committed to be in it for the long term. So here we are 11 years later, and we're still at it. And we've branched out. We're both doing some other things while UVC continues to grow. And I do see that I am making progress on the UVC front of working myself out of a job. All right. So that should be the goal. And if that's the goal for anybody on this session, then feel free to reach out to me directly and tell me about what you want to do in your startup community, and stay involved with the Startup Community Builder Network that we'll have right here on More Good Jobs, because there's going to be some other things that we're looking at right now to bring some startup community builders together in a much bigger audience than we currently have here in the More Good Jobs community. Stay tuned.
Awesome. Thanks, Martin. This was awesome. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I'm glad that we got a pretty good turnout despite a number of last-minute cancellations. So that's been awesome. It is recorded. It will be posted. I'm going to eventually post it on YouTube and then share a link in the More Good Jobs community. I'm pretty certain everybody here is involved in that, but I'm going to share a link as well to join if you aren't part of it. That's a great place for you to kind of share some of the things that you learned, experiences. We have a specific Startup Community Builders circle there that you can participate in, and we got some really good chat that goes through there as well. So just more opportunities to connect with other community builders really across the world. We've got literally across the US and in the UK here. So it's a pretty awesome group. But thank you, everyone. Thank you, Martin.
And James, you'll get a copy of the chat emailed to people that are on this call?
I sure will. I'll download it right now.
Great. Thanks so much, all. Have a great weekend, too. All right. Looking forward to seeing you on More Good Jobs Community.
Take care, everybody.
All right.
Thank you, Martin.